All right, we're now in part 2 of coding this app. I want to start with a fun tip that isn't necessarily Serverpod specific, but it's a nice tip when you're doing like a full stack app that has a decoupled front end and back end. Previously we had our entire project open in one VS Code window. However, it can kind of get annoying to flip context and go between. So I actually like to open them up separately. So you'll see right now on my screen, I actually am inside, if we do a PWD, we're inside the OpenMic server. And with just the command tilde, I can go to the other VS Code window where I actually have, we're inside the Flutter directory. So same thing, just one in. This allows me just to switch back really easily. Now, bonus tip, there's a really cool extension. It's called Peacock. You can install this. It's free. And Command-Shift-P and start typing Peacock, you're going to see a bunch of options. And you can actually pick a color for that project. And you'll see I'm using blue for the Flutter one and green for the backend. Just doesn't really matter what the colors are, just something that looks nice. But now it's just easy for me to know, am I in this code base or this code base? This is especially useful when both sides of your code base are the same language, which it is in this case. Because sometimes you're like, oh, there's dark code. Like, what am I in? Am I in the back end or the front end? So yeah, that's how we're gonna do. Maybe not for the entire series, but at least right now, I want to do it this way. Okay, so we left off essentially building our authentication. We have a bit of the creating an account and the login working. Let's just do a quick review of that. From the server point of view, there wasn't much we had to do. It was just a bit of configuration. So we installed the Serverpod auth server package or module, and we configured a few things about it, such as how to send the validation email, which again, for now, we're just printing out to the console rather than actually setting up an email service at this time. We will do that eventually. We're only using just email login, although we do plan to add Google and Apple at some point. But we just need a way to have users. So this is totally good. So yeah, that's mostly what we did over here. There wasn't too much on the back end. On the front end, we've essentially created a feature called auth. And inside here, we have an auth service. And our auth service, we essentially have to inject in the client, which is the Serverpod API client, as well as the session manager, which is like the Serverpod's way of dealing with saving this logged in user. We created a register with email, which talks through our Serverpod client to this generated code to create an account request, which requires username, email, and password. And we also have to confirm an email registration, which requires a verification code. We have a few providers set up here. Like we have an auth service provider here, which allows us to have a singleton of this auth service and not have to always, like every time we're going to use it, inject these things in. So we just have to work with this. And right now we just have some temporary code to basically test out creating an account and then confirming it. Normally this would be done obviously with UI that you would fill out, but that's a problem possibly for today. All right, so I'm just going to get our app booted up. So two things we need to do, or three things. First of all, Docker. Let's just make sure we have Docker running, and specifically our OpenMic project. There it is. On the server side, we're going to want to run dart bin cli.dart, or is it main? Yeah, main.dart. So we're just going to run that to get our server running. Make sure we don't have any errors. Okay, cool. And then on the Flutter side, a few things you can do here. You can, of course, click the Run button here and choose what you want to use. I'm going to start my iOS simulator right now, and we'll let that kind of start in the background. We can click the Run app. We can, of course, do Control FN, F5 on my keyboard at least, but basically Control F5 to launch it, which that's usually what I do, but I'll just click the Run button. And we'll get that going. Okay, so the first thing I want to get out of the way today is we want to have a custom user. So to give you an idea of how Serverpod works, let's just go to one of these here that return user info. So this is kind of like the built-in user object that comes with the auth package. And you'll see it has an ID, it has a user identifier. By default, the user identifier is actually just the email because that's something that's unique. You can't have two people with the same email. They have a username, a full name, an email address, when they were created, an image URL, scope names. I'm actually not sure what that is, and blocked. What is blocked? Blocked is whether that user's been, as maybe a moderator is like, this user is abusing the system, we're going to block them without deleting them. So that's, I assume, what that is. Scope names, I think it has something to do with permissions. It's something we might learn about on this. So that's great. Those are kind of like key core things to do with logging in a user and knowing enough about them for them to authenticate. But for us, we also want, because this is a bit of a social app, we also want to have, a profile, such as like a bio. Maybe they have links to their Instagram. Maybe they have, they're going to have things like friends and stuff like that. And we still want to use this. We don't want to rebuild this our own. We want to be able to work with the Serverpod one. But essentially, we want another database table that we're going to call user that's going to do a one-to-one relationship within the user info. And that will allow us to essentially set this up in a way where we're not thinking about what's the difference between user info and user. It's going to kind of get combined together in some sense. I'm going to try and, make this all work. I've done this before. I've actually done a specific video on this pretty recently. So if I do breeze through a few things and you're confused, obviously ask in the comments, or, join me on my YouTube channel membership, and you can be part of our Discord and all that good stuff. Now, and what I was getting at there is also, you can watch that video. It's called Serverpod Custom User, and I bet I go into it a little more in depth. And it's really focused on the backend part of it, the Serverpod configuration, which is where most of the work will be right now. So let's start to figure this out. We're going to go to the backend, and we're actually going to create our first custom model. So we're going to go into models, and we're going to create something called user.spy.yaml. And if you recall, spy just means Serverpod YAML, and it's a way where it can, so that the linter of Serverpod, if you have this extension, the Serverpod extension, which I highly recommend installing, you'll get, I already have it. It's like there's an error in this file. If this was just a YAML file, it's a perfectly fine YAML file and nothing, it wouldn't give me any errors. So it's a nice thing right there. Okay, so what we want to do here, this is essentially where we define our model. We're not writing Dart code here. We're essentially configuring it, and all the code is going to get generated for us, which is something that's awesome about Serverpod. So first of all, we want to say, what's the class going to be called? What are we going to refer to it as in Dart? So it should be a camel case name. It could be user. If we were making something else, like that was, 2 words, like track stream or something like that, we'd want to do it like this in what's called Pascal case, just to stick with the normal convention. But we're going to call it user just like that. Then, assuming it's something we want to store in the database, which it is, we need to give the database table name. And the general convention is it's just a lowercase version, or in fact, technically a snake case, as it's called, if it was something like track stream. Also, conventionally, singular, not plural, although there's nothing stopping you from doing that. Some frameworks like Django and stuff, I believe Django uses singular, whereas some like Rails might use like plural as their default. It's just nice to follow the convention of what framework you're using, and Serverpod uses it this way. Okay, now we have to define some fields. So first of all, if this was just us making like a very basic model, this is where we might put like a title, a description, a body, all these kinds of things. We are going to do that. In fact, we'll start by doing bio. It's a pretty basic thing. That'll just be like, what they write on their profile, like they're about them. And all we have to say is what type of variable it is. It's a string in this case, and we're following the same. If this was a bool, it would be lowercase because that's what we do in Dart. If it was an int, it would be like this, that kind of thing. But we're going to make it a string, and we are going to make it a required field. We're just going to allow it to be empty, essentially, and the default, will be empty. Now, most importantly, and this part might be a little bit complicated because we haven't done much with Serverpod yet and stuff, but we want to make a one-to-one relationship with that user info module we were talking about. So for that, we just need to call it user info, just like it's called over there. And we need to reference something that's actually outside of even our own code. So what we do is we do modules and then colon auth, because that's the name of the module, and that's because we named it auth. If you remember in the generator, we gave it a nickname of auth here. If we didn't do that, we'd actually have to do Serverpod auth here. And then we actually take the model that's within there, which is user info. So that just kind of matches what we were showing you here, this user info right here. However, we're going to essentially allow it to be null because it won't exist right at the start necessarily. And we want to say this is going to be a relation. Actually, I am going to try something. I don't know if we need this to be null. I'm going to allow it or basically force it to that it has to exist. And we'll see if that works. If not, we might have to change it. I'm going to put this one first because this is kind of like that key, really important thing. This is telling me something. Invalid data type. Well, we'll see what happens. Was it there when we did this? Oh, it's because this should be singular, I believe. Module auth user info. Okay, maybe we do have to do this. We'll come back to that. So that's good, and this will work just as it is, but if we want to be more efficient at the database level, we want to create an index on this so that these things are always connected together. So we can go indexes, and we want to do user info ID, unique ID, sorry, IDX. So it's not ID, it's the index. That's just like a short form for index. And here we just have to say what fields are going to be part of this index, and in that it's going to be the user info ID. And we want to say unique equals true because we only ever want one of these. We can't have multiple that have the same, ID essentially. I'm going to see if there's a way to solve this. So fields with model relations must be nullable. Okay, I guess not. All right, so we're going to save that. Cool. Now, the next thing we're going to want to do is actually do a code generation. So we're going to go inside our server directory, serverpod generate. And this will generate us some sweet, sweet code. Okay. Now, importantly, what we want to do is whenever a user signs up, we essentially want to create a profile for them. Even if it's just an empty one that we haven't added anything, we want it to just exist right away. So we're going to go back to our server code here. And inside our auth config where we did the validation, there's another property. And there's a lot of stuff. You can look at these. There's a lot of cool configuration you can do, password lengths, all that kind of stuff. And we're going to do something called onUser created. So this gets fired every time a new user is created. And it has a few parameters. First is the session, just like most of these things have. Session. Second will be the actual user info that came back. And this will be async, so we'll mark it like this. And you'll see I'm just following this session user info. Cool. And then in here, let's just, can the user info be null? It says it's not. It says it can't be. Oh, but the ID could be null. So something about Serverpod is that any IDs can technically be null. And that's because I believe the decision there is when you're working with something like in Serverpod, like you might be constructing a model just completely on the client side, then sending it up, but it hasn't been saved in the database yet. So it doesn't have an ID until it's in the database. So we want to make sure it has an ID. I guarantee, or I'm not going to guarantee, but I'm quite sure that this will always have an ID in this case because the user has just been created. Now, if we're using something like on user will be created, I believe in this case, this happens before it's actually saved to the database, so there wouldn't be an ID. But we're doing on user created, we should be safe, but we're going to wrap it in this just to be extra safe. We're not going to purposely like force this right here with the exclamation mark and hope for the best. So in here, now what we want to do is actually make a new user. So I'm just going to call it user. And we can actually go user. Wow, what's this? This is the model we made. And if we actually open it up in the generated code, you see we have this model that extends something called table row, which is anything that has a database, as well as protocol serialization, which is anything that can be serialized, meaning sent between server and client. It automatically gave us like a from JSON, a factory. Looks a lot like something like freeze if you've used that. It's different, but same idea. It has 2 strings. It has a whole bunch of stuff. We didn't write any of this code though. All we did was write this, and it did all this for us, as well as other things. But that's pretty cool. So we have this user, and you'll see it got imported just by going importing. I believe this came from, well, we can see right here. Yeah, it came from the generated user.dart. And here for our user info ID, well, we're just going to take our user info.id right there. And we do need to just put this here, but we know it's not null. Sorry, no, we don't. We need to check if it doesn't equal null. And then in theory, we could get rid of that, but we're getting complaint. And then we do need to put a default bio. And of course, we could write something like hi or something like that, but let's just make it blank for our user. You know, they can start with an empty bio. Okay, cool. Then what we need to do is actually save that user. So to do that, we just go await, because this will be anytime we're talking in the database, it will be an asynchronous operation. We'll go user. Now the user model itself has a whole bunch of cool stuff on it. One of them is the user repository, which is aliases.db. And here's where we can do our actual like ORM operations. And in this case, we want to go user.db.insert_row. So we're inserting a row to our database, and the row we're going to insert is actually this user object right here. And that will just go and it will create it. And that's all we have to do. Now, if we wanted to process anything else here, we could, of course, do it. We could generate them like a random image, but something that's cool with Serverpod, and we saw in the last video, it already does that. It already like takes their name and gives them a letter and a random color. So we're good here. So now when next time we sign up, we will have a a user object connected to that. So I guess we should probably test that out, right? So I did have to stop my server, partly because I had to generate code, but because even if I had this in a different tab, we do have to still restart anytime we're changing our server code, because it's using whatever's in memory at the time of restarting it. There might be a way to hot reload your server. I haven't actually looked into it, but I don't mind this approach. Keeps things, clean. Okay, so we're running this again. Did our app ever start? I don't know. I don't think I actually even... No, I did start it. Where is... There we are. Okay, so we're going to use our test account stuff again. And I won't be able to use the same name because it already exists. So we'll just do Tyler2, and username has to be unique, I believe, as well. So we'll do Tyler2. And let's, first of all, try clicking this button. And we should see on our server that we got a code. So I'm going to take that code because we need to now paste that in. Normally this would be done in UI, but yeah, we're just trying to like get everything working. So we're just going to change this to Tyler2 and then that new code. Reload, click this button again. And we have an internal server error. Okay, what is the problem here? Oh, yes, of course. We forgot to do something. So I'm going to stop my server. And right here, basically what happened, it worked the first time because there wasn't something new. But it's trying to add something to our database to a table called user. And that database, even though we've generated code, we haven't actually generated migrations or even ran the migrations. So for that, we want to run Serverpod, and let's just open up our migrations here. So we currently have, this is the one that came with Serverpod. The second one here came when we installed the auth package. But we're going to run Serverpod. I think it's create migrations. Is that what it was? No, create migration, not plural. So we're going to run that, and you'll see it made a whole new folder here. Now, let's actually look at this one a little more in depth. Since this was a model that we made, it'll make more sense to us. So first of all, let's look at the definition.json. So you'll see, okay, here's the name of the module that it's part of, and that's OpenMic because that's the name of our module. And we can see it's going to create a table. Technically, the migration could have multiple tables, and actually, it looks like it does, which is cool. But it's creating a table called user, and here's the fields. There's going to be an ID. Now, we didn't actually type an ID here, but that's just something with a Serverpod model. You always have an integer ID. We have that user info ID, and we have the bio of a string. And look, there's a stuff for the foreign keys here. What what actually happened, and everything's cool. So again, we don't have to understand how that all works. It just works, but it's fun to look at. And we can also look at the migration.sql, and this is what we'll run when we actually run the migration. So it's going to create a table called user. This is just PSQL, PostgreSQL. And it's going to create that unique index, and then it's going to alter it by connecting that unique index. And then I'm actually not sure what these ones are. All right, whatever. So let's run the migration. So now to run a migration, it's actually just we go dart bin main.dart, and we just have to add -- apply migrations, and this will start the server and also apply the migrations. All right. So now I shouldn't have to actually even change anything in the front end because it's going to hit this new version when we click this. And now we actually see, okay, it looks like nothing went wrong. And on the Flutter side, this was the error I believe from before, but let's find out. I'm going to open up our trusty dbeaver, and we'll take a look at our database and see if it set up the way that we wanted to. Okay, so we have, oh, let's get rid of that. I don't need tips, nope. So this is, what are we looking at? This is the user info. So this already worked before, so I'm not surprised that's in there. That's the new user we made. Now let's look at the public schema, and we should see user here because that was the user info one. And okay, we don't see anything in here, so something did go wrong. I'm curious what it is. All right, so from what I can tell, it was just because I think we created the user before we did the data migration, and then we tried to do this after the data migration. So doing a fresh one with Tyler 3 seemed to have worked. And you'll see here, this database table is pretty basic right now. It has an ID. This is just the ID of this table. And it's kind of irrelevant, but it has a reference to the user info ID, so number 3. And it has a bio. And eventually we can add more and more things here, like profile URLs, all that kind of stuff. And if we refresh this, let's see if this makes sense. So yeah, 3. So Tyler 3 links to that. So we now have this sort of relationship between these things. Now these two are kind of broken. We can manually fix it by just adding a few things, and maybe I will just do that. I'm not sure how to do it in this program, but you know, I'll fix that, you know, at another time, or we'll just completely wipe our database. We'll see. But now we have, yeah, when a new user gets made, we have this user profile, which is pretty cool. Let me just get this organized again. And next, let's figure out how we want to work with this user. Because sure, saving it is fine, but we need a way for our client to actually talk to it. So we are going to now create our first endpoint. So let's talk about endpoints. We kind of looked at this in the first video. This is just the example endpoint, and I'm just going to copy this because we'll use it as a starting point. But basically, the way it works, you have this is like the namespace we'll be using, example in this case, and these are the different functions we can have within it. So hello. If we're doing just like a RESTful like CRUD API, we'd probably have an endpoint for create, for update, for delete, and like retrieve and list. That's a pretty common pattern for our models. So let's actually create one that is, you know, with our real data. We'll delete this one at some point, I'm sure. So we're going to go user endpoint .dart. So it's important to note this is not meant for auth. We already have endpoints for auth. They come with the auth package that we installed. But this is anything to do with the user itself. So we're going to call this user endpoint. We're actually going to just get rid of this. Actually, I'll comment it out because we might want it for reference. And let's save that. And let's write some code. So the first thing we want to do is we need a way to get the logged in user. Okay. So for this, we're going to do a future user, and it might return null. Let's import user. So this is what we get return, a user or maybe nothing, because if there's no one logged in, and by the person logged in, I mean the actual user who is using the app. This is going to return a reference of themselves if they are logged in. So we'll call this me, which is just a pattern I like. It's like we would be able in the Flutter app to be like, you know, user.me, and we'll get the data of me. And by me, I mean the context of that logged in user. We make this async, and we do have to put in one parameter here, and it's just the session. And this is just, like I said before, kind of like the build context of, you know, the backend of Serverpod. Okay, so within here, we need to get access. We need to find out if there even is a user logged in. And we can do that by going authenticate. I'm just going to call it authentication info. Authentication info. We're going to await session. So good thing we have access to this session. And we can go authenticated. So this returns a future of a authentication info, which can be null if no one's logged in. So let's first of all check, you know, if it is null. So if authentication info equals null, we're just going to return null right away and not do anything with it. Now, in the case that we got past this and we didn't short circuit out, we can get access to the user. So let's just go user equals await user user.db.findFirstRow. So this is just another ORM function. We did one for saving already or inserting. Now we can do one for finding something. So we want to find the first row, and we have to pass session into there. This is the thing we're going to be kind of passing through, just like you do with build context. And here we can do a where clause, because we don't want to just, this would get the first row in the database, just doesn't matter, but we want to get a specific row that it finds. And right here we can go row, and this is kind of like, doing something when you're working with lists with where clauses and stuff, a little bit different syntax, but the same kind of idea. And we can go row dot user info, and you'll see, so this is smart enough to know that this is the user table. So we can see, what does the user table look like? Well, it has user info ID and it has a bio. Again, this is all generated code. We didn't make this. And we want to go where user info.id equals. And here we have to pass in a value, and that's where we'll use this dot user ID. Okay, so what will this return? This is still potentially null because it's going to find the first one. It might not find anything, so that's fine. And we could simply just from here return user, and that would work great. Sometimes it would be null, sometimes it would be the user itself. And what's cool about Serverpod is we don't have to think about serializing this. Normally in like a REST framework sort of thing, you would have the data from the table, and then you'd have to map it to a serializer, but that happens automatically. So it's really easy to work with. Now, there's one thing we can do to make this a little bit better. Rather than now having a second endpoint, people have to hit to get the user info itself, we can actually combine this. So we can go include in our query. So this will say when it's going out to the database, it'll basically do a join on something, in an efficient way, so that we actually get other data. And here we are going to include, and we have to use whatever model we're working with, like a static function on it will always have an include. And that's just, again, generated code. There you go, all this lovely stuff. And in here, we want to include the user info. And in order to do that, we actually take whatever the model is that we're including. In this case, it's user info itself, which we might have to import. And we actually now run include on that. Now, if user info also had a relationship we wanted to work with, we could then inside here also do something. We could kind of make this go, but there's nothing else we need. That's as far as we want. We'll add a couple commas to make this pretty. And now we actually will return that user, which again could be null, but it will be the user in theory. Let's remove this. Okay, so let us now restart our server. Actually, one thing we have to do first is actually we've made a new endpoint. So we want to run our Serverpod generate, which I might have in my history. There we go, Serverpod generate. So I'm going to run that. And now we've generated. So something to note, when do I have to run generate? So to me, the rules usually are, okay, I've made a new model, or I've updated a model. I've added new fields to it or something like that. If I'm just changing an existing endpoint, like say we went in here and we said, oh, I actually also want to like include something else, or I want to, change my where clause. If we're just doing something like that within basically the boundaries of the function, we do not have to regenerate. Because we have to still restart the server for it to get the new code, but we don't have to actually run the generation. However, if we added a full new, either a full new endpoint like this, or a new function within the endpoint, or we change the shape of it, meaning what it returns or the parameters put in, we have to rerun the generator, because the generator is what actually creates, all these lovely, things for us. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, if you're like, oh, should I run the generator? Should I not? Like, it's safe to just run it. You can run it anytime. You can delete all your generated code and regenerate it. They're all created deterministically. So I ran Serverpod generate. We don't have to create a migration because we didn't actually like change our data. We didn't do anything in our user.spy.yaml. So there's no database change. So we're good there. And then we can just rerun our server like this, dart bin main.dart. Okay, so now we have this set up. That's pretty cool. Let's go to the Flutter side, and let's go to our auth service. So our auth service here, we have register with email, we have confirm email registration. That's cool. We want a way to get the user. And now that I think about it, actually, we're going to keep, even though like, and this is something I always like, kind of like fought with for a long time. Like, do I separate these things? Do I not? I believe that user is a separate feature from auth. Auth is all about just really tokens, logging in, like authorization and authentication. Whereas anything about like users, whether it's your profile or following people or all that kind of stuff, that doesn't belong in auth. So we're actually going to create a new feature here called user, believe it or not. And inside here, we'll probably end up having this exact same pattern, components, models, providers, screens, services. But for now, let's start with services because we're going to need that. And let's make a new folder also called providers. We're definitely going to need that for now. Okay, so I'm going to, inside our services, we'll start there. We're going to make a user service. And it's going to be similar to this. So we're going to do class user service. And we need to still inject the client, just like that. And we need to now obviously create a constructor for this. It can be const, and we can just go this.client like we did over there. Now, we don't need necessarily the session manager. We might find at some point, oh, we actually need the session manager to do something in this. But as far as I know, we will not need it. So we're not even going to worry about injecting it. And let's create a future, which of course we'll still use fp-dart. We're going to use fp-dart through all of our services. It could return a user. So let's try and get that imported. It's a little bit hard sometimes to get it. So let's just do, I'll just do dynamic for now, just so we can finish writing this. Actually, sorry, the first one will be a string. That means something went wrong, and then dynamic, but this we'll replace it with user. And we'll just call it the same thing. User service.me. Async. Okay, so let's see if we can make this work. We're going to go final result equals await client dot. Let's see if it's in here. Okay, something did not generate. Client. We have the example in here. We don't have the user. Okay, maybe I didn't run the generator. I saw it in my history. Let's see, user endpoint. I'm going to rerun the generator. Serverpod generate. It could also be that it's just, sometimes I notice this, especially when you have these separated, it's not getting like access to the new code. So I'm actually going to, well, let's see if it worked this time. Client.user, because it's not noted. Oh, there, it did work. So you actually see now within client, we actually have this user endpoint, right? And here we can call me. Okay, awesome. So that was pretty simple. And we'll see this automatically returns a user that's nullable. It matches exactly what we did here. Everything, the bridge between it, like you'll see here, here's the client code for the endpoint, and this is all just generated stuff. And this is essentially the bridge between our Flutter app and our backend. Okay, so we can call that, and here it might be null. So we will go if result equals null. We will return left the we can say not authenticated or something, right? That's the only case I believe that would happen. Otherwise, we're just going to return the result. And of course, we could decide instead of calling this result, we could just call this user. Now, let's see, we should have user now in here as an option to import. Let's see if I can trick it. User, because we have it, it knows about it. Let's see, import. Sometimes, just in general, this isn't a server thing. Sometimes the auto importing stuff can be a bit of a pain. So let us see what we can do here to get that. I have to remember where this comes from. It's part of, I think we can just import the client. Oh, we already have the client imported. Okay, so let's look inside here. Protocol. Where's our user model? Where's our good old user model? Oh. So I've seen this before. Sometimes just opening up some of the auto-generated code, whether it's the client itself or things like that, actually gets VS Code to be like, oh, I know about that now. So here, just it just kind of fixed itself. Okay, and now here we can't just return user. We need to return right of user, because we're going to conform to this. Something went wrong, return a string, cool. Otherwise, something went right, which is why it makes sense to be on the right. We do that. Now we do, other things can go wrong, right? And just like we did over here, we want to wrap this into try catch, because maybe your network stopped working, So let's go like this. We'll have an error. We'll even have a stack trace for now, which is nice, especially in development. And we're just going to copy the same thing if something goes wrong. We will eventually add better logging to our app, because printing is not really the best way to do things. But we got to kind of like stay focused. Stay focused. Don't go all over the place. Okay, so now we have our user service. So what we need now is a user service provider so that we can access it in our code. So I'm going to take our auth service provider. It's basically going to be the exact same thing, except it's going to return user service. And we will just rename this to user. And we'll take this. And all this is good, but we don't have to inject the session manager. So we'll just do this. We can get rid of a few imports. And now we have a user service provider. So let's see if we can make this work. You know what? There's one thing we have to do, because right now we don't even have logging in. We just have registering. So we need to actually create a way to log in. So let's go to our auth service and let's create that right now. It'll be pretty similar. We'll just copy one of these, and I'm actually gonna put it before registration because I feel like login is pretty normal. We'll do login with email because again, we're gonna allow other ways to log in. So we'll need an email and password. And here, I think it's authenticate. Yeah, so authenticate is something we can pass, and we need to pass the email and the password. So just get rid of that. And what does this return? An authentication response. Okay, so it's never null, but we can check some things. We can go if result dot, let's do if the result is not successful, then we can return something like could not log in. We're going to improve this because there's actually ways we can find out what the reason was, but I want to keep moving. Now for what we're returning here, what does this end up being? We need to remember, let's see, result dot. We have a key ID, and we have the user info. That's pretty cool. That's what we're, I think, going to want to actually return from here. So we can also go if result.userinfo equals null. We also want to kind of throw an error because, and this will say like, for now, user info null. I really doubt this would happen. I think we'll always have the user info if it gets passed here, but we can't assume anything, right? Otherwise, we're going to just then return result.userinfo in our right. Now it's giving us error because we're supposed to be setting back void, but we're going to now change this to userinfo. All right, and we just need to say that this is like this. Now, we can take this a bit further if we wanted to and actually return the entire user by hitting another endpoint, but that would require us to then, kind of like duplicate our code or put in other things. So I think this is just totally fine for now, and we'll fix something up at some point. Okay, so that's our login with email. Okay, now just doing this is really just a way for our code to know if the user was authenticated properly. We're not actually telling the session manager that, hey, keep this guy logged in, store his token, whatever, or her token, that kind of thing. And to do that, we actually will go await. We take our session manager, which is the main reason we have this injected, one of the main reasons. And we want to go register signed in user. And for this, we simply have to pass in the user info. So it's, if we look at the shape of this, it's the user info, the authentication key ID, and the authentication key. So we can just get that all from the result. User info, result dot, what was the next one? It was something about the key, and then result dot key ID. We're going to put these right here. I might have these in reverse. Oh, the ID comes first. That's why we're having that error. And we need a comma there, of course. Now, this is a little bit dangerous to do because in theory, these could be null. I don't think they ever will be, but let's also just do some checks for that. So if result dot, what were they again? Key ID equals null, or result dot key equals null, we're going to return an error. And maybe this will just say something like no authentication token found. Sure. So this will now register them as signed in, meaning when we load the app again, it will, assuming their access token hasn't expired, they will stay logged in until we log them out, which is something we'll do at a future time. Okay, cool. So this will return that. Now I am toying with the idea, like I do think trying to think if we want to, no, I think sending this back is fine. If we need to fix it, there's a chance we might want to actually return the whole user back in a login. And if we need to do that, we will. but let's just keep them separated for now. This will just return the user info so that we can potentially do something with it. Okay, so now we have our login service made. So let's go to our where we've been kind of playing around with things, and just in our main.dart, and let's go ref.read, and we will do this will be still auth service provider, and we can go log in. Now I should be able to log in with any of these ones right here. So let's just paste those in. And password, we just had this lovely test password. And let's just let's actually await this so we can check if the result. This should be user info in theory. We need to make this asynchronous, and let's actually just print this out to see what actually comes back from this if it works. So I'll save this. Let's go to our server. We actually have to start it because it's not running right now. And we'll go back to our app. Let's just get that open. Let's also, fun tip, clearing the logs, your debug console is sometimes a nice thing, so you don't get confused if it was something from before. So let's do this. I know that button isn't actually, creating an account, but here we got back this. Now, because we're using fp-dart, and I don't think we've shown this yet, this is probably a good place to do it. What you see we got back right, this kind of thing. What we really want to be doing anytime we're reacting to a, this sort of functional programming is we want to fold the result. The first parameter is going to be, what we had on the left, in which case it's an error, and we can do something with that error, right? So we can, do something like, we don't have a, any toast service or anything yet, so we can't do anything cool, but we can just print the error here. So let's try that. Secondly, the second parameter of the fold is when there is a success, when it's right. And in this case, we can call this user info, which is why I like to use the word result here, because result isn't actually the user info yet. And then within here, we can do something like print the user info. So let's actually try that again. Create test account. And you'll see what actually printed now, although it might be a little small, is it doesn't have the right wrapped around anymore. It is actually the user info. Now, if we change this to like the wrong password, let's see what happens. So we get could not log in because it went here and it printed this string. So we'll be able to react to that however we want. Okay, awesome. I think that's a good place to leave this video chapter. And in the next one, we'll start actually incorporating the user itself. We'll get logging out working, and we'll do some UI to actually show who the logged in user is, so we can make sure everything's working before we get into the core, functionality of our app. So yeah, thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you in the next one.